Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Shanae Vaifanua, but you can call me Vi. I'm going to be giving you 5 tips on how to help reduce your anxiety during this pandemic. Let's get started. Okay, so before we get into the 5 tips, I want to share a little bit about why I even wanted to make a video on this topic. Reflecting back over the last 10 months, I've really came to terms to acknowledge that I have probably been the most stressed, anxious, and depressed than I have ever been in my entire life. And a lot of that comes from fear. A lot of that comes from I am the person who you would categorize as the worrywart. A lot of that probably came from heightened concern of something that was unknown. Right? Something that was uncertain. And as I was thinking about this, I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared with the coping skills. I wasn't prepared with how to deal with the uncertainty and the fear that I was having. And I want to share some tips that I wish somebody would have told me. I want to give them some tools that I wish I would have had last March. So that is why I wanted to do this video. I am not perfect. I am still working through my own anxiety, but I do think that I found some tips that are good to reflect on and consider and think about and see if they could be helpful to you. So here we go. The first tip that I want to share is to name it, acknowledge it, and recognize it. I think anytime there is an issue, a concern, a problem in your life, you can't solve it, you can't resolve it, you can't move past it if you can't name it. Naming the feeling, naming the emotion of anxiety is okay. So I know that's part of my truth. That's part of my mess, is I did not want to be labeled as somebody with anxiety. I was afraid of that name. I didn't want to be categorized in that way. I didn't want to have that label a part of me. I'm a leader. I'm a manager. I am the one who people are supposed to turn to for motivation. And I have anxiety? No. Like, those were the things that would go through my mind. And yet, the further I tried to go away from that name, the more anxiety my body was producing. And if there's anything I would go back and change is from day one, I would have said, I'm really anxious. I'm struggling with all of this change. I'm struggling with all of this uncertainty, and I need help moving past this. Tip number 2, find a grounding practice and turn it into a routine. So what does that look like? Well, for me, as a former athlete, a former student athlete, don't ask how old I am, just know I was a former student athlete. Okay, basketball was my world. Sports was my world. And going to practice and going to games, that was my sanctuary. That was my grounding. That was my centering. That was my space where I could pour all this energy into one activity and not worry about anything else going on in the world. Let that be a test that I wasn't prepared for. Let that be family stress. Let that be financial stress, relationship stress, all of that. When I was in those 4 lines on the court, all of that could go away. So for me, at that time in my life, my grounding, my centering was going to practice, was going to games. Okay. Fast forward to 2020, if I was a student athlete now, I wouldn't have access to my grounding sanctuary, right? So many teams, so many student athletes aren't in season this year. Due to COVID, seasons have been cut short. Players have not been able to go back to campus. It's critical to find a grounding practice or multiple grounding practices that can adapt, that can change over time and still help you even if your circumstances change. So student athletes out there, if you're not playing right now and your sport, going to practice or going to that game was your sanctuary, you got to find another one. So one of the ways that I find grounding, or I have implemented into my grounding practice, is being barefoot. I am a proud Polynesian woman and I love being barefoot. If you know Polys, if you know Samoans, most of us want to be barefoot versus wearing shoes. My fiance makes fun of me every day, it's fine. So while we joke about it in our household, I really learned that it actually brings a sense of grounding to me, right? Being able to sit in a meeting that I'm stressed out in and have my feet on the ground and being able to wiggle my toes and feel that my feet are planted on this earth, planted in this space right now, has brought me grounding. Another example, one of my dearest friends got me a present with a grounding rock. And it's this little heart-shaped rock, and every time I rub it, it reminds me and symbolizes to me, get grounded, get centered, breathe. So you can also do something that's symbolic. You can also do something that's going to remind you how to ground yourself and how to build that practice. Tip number 3, get active. Okay, the question I want you to ask yourself or write down, so grab a pen and paper and write this down. I want you to ask yourself every day, how can I add more movement into my day? How can I add more movement into my day? One of them is standing at the kitchen table, standing where I am not sitting during a Zoom meeting, but I'm actually standing and trying to move, sway side to side, but really trying to add more of that movement. Another one is taking a walk with my fur babies once a day. I love the new habit that our family is creating. We take our dogs on a walk, at least a 20-minute walk every day. That's adding more movement. We stay home. We are in the beautiful state of California, so the lockdown here is real. So once a day walks have been really helpful for us. And remember, you can always make these big goals and small goals to help you get active. If you watched my first video, we talked about small goals. If you haven't watched it, I recommend you go watch that after this one. But a small goal could be walking to the mailbox, okay? Going and getting your mail. Not driving, getting out of your car, grabbing your mail, getting back in your car and going home. No, literally park at home, walk to your mailbox, get your mail, and then come back in. Small goal. Big goal, for me, it's running a marathon before 2021 is over. I would love to do a marathon, whether it's small, short, or long, but running a marathon for me would be a big goal to get active. So small goals, big goals, in-between goals, there's a lot of things you can do with activity, but I did find that the more endorphins I was able to create in my body, the less anxious I was during the day. Another thing that I've learned is my anxiety follows the weather woes. Woe is me when the weather is gloomy. That is what I have learned. I love good weather. When it's sunny, it makes me smile. So if I know that my mood follows that weather, then when it is great outside, I need to go outside. And I encourage you that if you're anything like me and that is something you can relate to, take advantage of it when you have beautiful weather. Tip number 4, be mindful of what you're putting in your body. This one has been hard. But this one has also been the one that, if I'm honest with myself, if I'm clear with what my mess is, this one can really make a big impact for me and a big difference if I stay mindful in what I put in my body. So for example, 2 old practices that I had was starch was my best friend. If I was anxious, if I was sad, if I was moody, give me some starch, and that is the best medicine anyone could have ever provided me. I mean, I could sit there, watch my favorite movie, have a loaf of bread, and literally dip it in butter, and that is my treat. That probably isn't the best answer. If I was craving bread and butter, I knew I had some anxiety or anxious feelings somewhere that I needed to address. So just being mindful, being aware of those things can also help you learn if anxiety is showing up right now. And the 5th tip I would provide you is ask for help. Ask for help. Whether that is your healthcare provider, whether that is a clinical therapist or counselor, whether that's your spouse or your partner or your fiance, and you just need to tell someone you need help, you're struggling with something, you don't really know what it is, but you need help, ask for it. Something I've really been reflecting on and trying to lean into more and more is being strong, being independent, being a warrior. As a woman of color, those are the things that I have felt I needed to be. And I am those things. But I also think that I can ask for help and I can still have those traits and those features about me as well. That has been one of the toughest lessons or the toughest pieces of trying to reduce my anxiety is I would be so anxious about asking for help that I think I induced more anxiety. If anybody knows that feeling or can relate to that, I would be anxious, and so I needed help, but then I would be more anxious to ask for help. Asking for help is okay. Relying on other people is okay. Utilizing your support system to get through hard times is okay. And I believe that when we accept getting help is okay, when we accept that asking the right people, asking the right professionals, asking the right support system for help, it will reduce our anxiety. It will make things more manageable. And if there's ever a time that is needing a community, a support system, warriors behind you to get through this year, it's been this last year. So I encourage you to be okay with asking for help when you need it. So those are our 5 tips. And I truly, truly hope that you will find success if these are tips you want to incorporate into your life. If you're already incorporating these tips into your life, I want to know, and so does everybody else in our community, what other tips do you have? What other things have you done to help reduce your anxiety that you would share to the next person? I hope you found value in the information shared. If you did, feel free to like this video and make sure you subscribe so that you catch the next 5 tips in our 5 tip series during the pandemic. I'll see you then.